husband is cheating on me, but I don't care. My mother thinks I'm insane. I told my husband from day one, if you ever want to cheat, just leave. Don't sneak around. If someone can take you, they can keep you. He laughed and said I was his forever. That was 18 months ago. Now our neighbor, a literal supermodel, cooks him dinner every night while I work late, and I'm testing my own philosophy. We moved into our penthouse 6 months ago. Madison moved in next door the same week. 24, Ukrainian, signed with elite models. Her husband is 55, controls her bank accounts, makes her ask permission to buy groceries. I envy you renovating, she told us. Victor won't let me change anything. Says I have no taste. My husband Kyle immediately offered to let her help with ours. I was working 60-hour weeks at the firm. He worked from home. It made sense. At first, it was innocent. Madison would bring coffee, give opinions on paint colors. Then she discovered Kyle loved hiking, something I despise, and started joining his morning trails. They'd return laughing, sweaty, sharing inside jokes. Then came the cooking. You work so late, she said. Kyle shouldn't eat alone. In Ukraine, we never let neighbors go hungry. Every night, I'd come home to empty dishes from her apartment. Borscht, vareniki, chicken Kyiv, Kyle's favorites, which she'd somehow learned. Her husband doesn't eat with her? I asked once. Victor works late too. Moscow hours, Kyle explained. She's lonely. 2 weeks ago, I came home to find them covered in paint, renovating our guest bathroom together. Madison wore one of Kyle's old shirts. They didn't hear me come in, too busy laughing about some YouTube video they'd watched. Oh, you're early. Madison jumped up. I'll go. You two need couple time. After she left, Kyle couldn't stop talking about how helpful she'd been, how she had an eye for design, how Victor was wasting her potential. I told my mother everything. She exploded. You're just letting this happen? Ban her from your home. If Kyle wants to cheat, that's his choice. You're insane. You're enabling this. No, I'm seeing if my husband is trustworthy. If Madison can steal him with borscht and hiking, he was never mine. Mom called me deranged, said I was testing him on purpose. Maybe I was. But I needed to know, was Kyle the man who chose me forever? Or just another guy waiting for something better? Last night changed everything. I came home at midnight from a client dinner. The penthouse was dark except for candlelight from the dining room. Kyle and Madison sat at our table, wine glasses empty, her hand on his. They jumped apart when I walked in. It's not what it looks like, Kyle said immediately. Madison was crying. Victor hit me. I didn't know where else to go. I saw the bruise on her cheek, the cut on her lip. Why didn't you call the police? I asked. He owns me, she whispered. My visa, my modeling contract, everything is through his company. If I report him, I get deported. Kyle looked at me desperately. I told her she could stay here tonight. In the guest room. I studied them both. Madison's tears seemed real. The bruise was definitely fresh, but something felt off. Of course you can stay, I said. Mom called while Madison was showering. I hired a private investigator. What? You won't protect your marriage, so I will. He's been following Kyle for a week. Mother, they haven't had sex. Yet. But your husband goes to her apartment every day when you're at work. For hours. Maybe they're just friends. The investigator has photos. They're intimate. Cuddling on her couch. Her in lingerie while he's there. Him zipping up her dress. My chest tightened. Send them. The photos arrived instantly. Kyle and Madison on her balcony. Her in a silk robe, his arms around her waist. Another of them on her couch. Her head on his shoulder. His hand in her hair. One of him fastening her dress while she held her hair up. I was still staring at them when Madison came out in my robe. Thank you for letting me stay. You're so kind. Kyle is lucky to have someone so understanding. Understanding. Right. I smiled. Madison, can I ask you something? How did you get that bruise exactly? She touched her cheek. Victor's ring when he backhanded me. Which hand? His right? Victor was left-handed. I'd seen him sign for packages multiple times. And this happened tonight? An hour ago. But Victor's been in Moscow all week. His Instagram shows him at a conference. Madison went pale. Kyle stood up. How would you know that? He asked. I follow him. Interesting that he can abuse her from 3,000 miles away. The room went silent. Madison's tears had stopped completely. Kyle was looking between us like a trapped animal. Then my phone buzzed. The private investigator. You need to see this. Just took this photo. Someone's in your apartment. The photo showed our bedroom. Through the window, a figure was going through my dresser. We were all in the living room, which meant someone else was in our home. Kyle, I said slowly. Who else has our keys? His face went white. Madison's phone rang. She looked at the screen and dropped it. The caller ID said, wife. But Madison didn't have a wife. Unless, I freeze with my hand halfway to my phone, watching Madison's screen light up on the floor where she dropped it. The caller ID glows bright against the dark hardwood. Wife. Kyle steps toward the bedroom and I grab his wrist hard enough that he stops. My attorney brain kicks in before my emotions can take over. We need evidence. We need to secure the scene. We need the police here before whoever is in our bedroom destroys whatever they came for. I pull out my phone and dial 911 with my free hand, while keeping my eyes locked on both Kyle and Madison. She hasn't moved to pick up her phone. The ringing stops, and the screen goes dark. Madison's tears have completely disappeared from her face. She stands there in my bathrobe with her arms crossed, watching me like she's calculating something. Kyle tries to pull away from my grip, but I hold on tighter. The dispatcher answers and I report an active break-in at our address. Someone is in our bedroom right now going through our things. Madison stares at her phone on the floor like it might explode. Kyle's face has gone from confused to pale as he realizes what's happening. The dispatcher tells me officers are on their way and asks if we're in immediate danger. I tell her we're in the living room and the intruder is in the bedroom. She instructs us to stay where we are and keep the line open. Madison finally bends down to pick up her phone, but I tell her to leave it. She freezes halfway to the floor and looks at me. Her accent is still there, but something in her eyes has changed. She straightens up without touching the phone and sits down on our couch. Kyle is shaking now. He asks what's happening, and I tell him we're about to find out. The 4 minutes until the police arrive feel like hours. Nobody speaks. Madison sits perfectly still on the couch. Kyle stands next to me, breathing fast. I can hear movement from the bedroom. Soft sounds like someone going through drawers. The sirens finally wail up to our building, and I buzz the officers through the lobby. They arrive with hands on their weapons, and I point toward the bedroom. 2 officers move quickly down the hall while 2 others stay with us in the living room. We hear shouting from the bedroom. Hands up. Don't move. Get on the ground. More officers rush past us. Madison hasn't moved from the couch. Kyle grabs my arm and asks if I knew this was going to happen. I shake my head because I didn't know about the intruder, but I knew something was wrong with Madison's story. An officer leads a man out of our bedroom in handcuffs. He's maybe 30, wearing all black, with a camera bag over his shoulder. He claims he's building maintenance checking a leak, but the officer holds up a phone showing photos of documents. My documents. Files from my home office. Client contracts and financial records. The man can't explain why building maintenance would be photographing legal files at midnight. The officers sit him down on our dining room chair and start asking questions. I step closer and study his face. I've seen him before. The lobby. He signed in as Madison's guest. Twice last week. I remember because I noticed the same name 2 days in a row when I checked the lobby logs looking for package deliveries. I tell the responding officer that this man visited Madison's apartment multiple times recently. Madison goes completely white. Her hands grip the edge of the couch cushion. Kyle turns to stare at her with his mouth open. The officer asks if I'm sure, and I tell him to check the building logs. Madison starts to stand up, but an officer asks her to stay seated. She sits back down and her whole body has gone rigid. Another officer comes out of the bedroom holding evidence bags with my files inside. He asks if these are my documents, and I confirm they're client files from my law firm. Confidential information about ongoing cases. The officer taking the man's statement asks Madison if she knows him. She doesn't answer. Kyle asks her directly if she knows this man. Madison looks at the floor and her shoulders start shaking, but no tears come. The officer repeats the question. Madison finally nods. The room goes silent except for police radios crackling. I ask to see Madison's phone and she refuses. She pulls it against her chest with both hands. One officer suggests she should leave since this is now a police matter and she's not involved. I speak up fast. I tell them she received a very suspicious call just moments before we discovered the intruder. The call showed up as wife on her caller ID. The officer looks at Madison and asks about the call. Madison says it was a wrong number. I point to her phone on the floor where she dropped it. The officer picks it up carefully with a gloved hand and looks at the screen. The call log shows the incoming call from a contact saved as wife. He asks Madison to explain. She clutches her chest and says it's complicated. Kyle is staring at her like he's never seen her before in his life. His face has gone from pale to red and his hands are clenched into fists at his sides. The officer asks Madison again about her relationship to the man in handcuffs. She takes a long breath and admits he's her brother-in-law Bertram. But she insists she had no idea he was in our apartment tonight. She claims she hasn't spoken to him in weeks. The officer asks why her brother-in-law would break into her neighbor's home to photograph legal documents. Madison says she doesn't know. Her story is falling apart faster than she can rebuild it. Every answer creates more questions. Kyle's voice shakes when he asks her why she lied about everything. She doesn't respond. I pull out my own phone and call my mother while the police continue processing the scene. She answers on the first ring and I tell her to come now and bring Thea. She says they're already in the car and will be here in 15 minutes. The private investigator was apparently still watching our building. More officers arrive and start photographing everything. They dust for prints. They bag evidence. They take statements from all of us separately. Madison sits on our couch looking trapped while an officer asks her questions. Kyle stands by the windows with another officer explaining how he gave Madison our door code for emergencies. I'm in the kitchen recounting the whole evening when my mother and Thea arrive. Thea walks in and immediately starts asking questions that make it obvious she's dealt with complicated cons before. She wants to know about Madison's background, her husband Victor, her modeling career, her daily routine. The detective processing the scene lets Thea look at the photos on Bertram's phone. She scrolls through them with her face getting more serious. She shows the detective something and they talk in low voices. Thea comes over to me and explains that Bertram was specifically targeting documents related to my firm's client list and ongoing cases. He photographed files about 3 different clients, all of them wealthy tech executives going through divorces. This wasn't random. Someone wanted specific information about my professional work. Madison tries to stand up and leave, but the officers ask her to stay for more questioning. She sits back down on our couch and I notice something I hadn't before. When she's stressed, her Ukrainian accent completely disappears. She sounds American. Born and raised somewhere in the Midwest, maybe. The officer notices too and asks where she's originally from. Madison stumbles over her answer. Kyle finally speaks up from across the room. His voice is flat and defeated. He admits that Madison told him 2 weeks ago she was actually married to a woman named Alexia, not Victor. He says she claimed Victor was just a cover story because her modeling agency Elite was conservative and wouldn't accept her being gay. She said she needed to pretend to be straight to keep her career. Kyle believed her. He thought he was helping her maintain a necessary lie to protect herself. He never told me because Madison begged him to keep it secret until she could figure out how to come out safely. The room goes quiet again. Every single person is staring at Kyle. He looks at the floor and his whole body sags. Thea asks him if Madison ever introduced him to Alexia. Kyle shakes his head. She asks if he ever saw proof of Madison's modeling contract. He shakes his head again. She asks if he ever actually met Victor in person. Another head shake. Thea turns to me with an expression that says everything. Madison played my husband completely. She found his weaknesses and exploited every single one. His need to be helpful, his desire to be trusted, his pride in being someone's confidant. She used all of it to gain access to our home and our lives while setting up whatever this operation was supposed to be. I turn to Kyle and my voice comes out flat and cold. He opens his mouth to explain, but I hold up one hand. The detective finishes processing the scene and approaches us with his notepad. Kyle starts talking fast about how Madison told him she was married to a woman named Alexia instead of Victor. He says she claimed Victor was a fake cover story because her modeling agency wouldn't accept her being gay. He believed her completely. She begged him to keep it secret until she could figure out how to come out safely. He never questioned it. He never told me. He spent weeks helping her plan some escape from a situation that didn't exist while I worked late and trusted him. My chest feels tight, but my face stays blank. The detective asks Kyle when Madison first told him about Alexia. Kyle says it was 2 weeks ago during one of their morning hikes. She cried on the trail and he comforted her. The detective writes this down and asks if Kyle ever met Alexia or saw proof of Madison's modeling contract. Kyle shakes his head twice. The detective asks if he ever met Victor in person. Another head shake. I watch Kyle realize how completely he was played. His face goes pale and he sits down hard on our couch. Madison is still sitting across from us with her hands folded in her lap. Her accent is completely gone now and she sounds American. Midwest, maybe. The detective notices and asks where she's originally from. She stumbles over her answer and says Ukraine. But it sounds like a question. Nobody believes her. Thea touches my elbow and guides me toward the kitchen. She pulls out her phone and scrolls through more photos. These are from yesterday afternoon. Madison sitting at a coffee shop with 2 other people. One is a woman around 30 with dark hair pulled back. The other is a man who looks similar to the woman. They have papers spread across the table. Thea zooms in and I can see building floor plans, security schedules, lists of names. My name is on one of the lists. Thea swipes to another photo showing Madison pointing at something on the floor plan. The woman is taking notes. The man is on his phone. Thea says they met for over an hour and left separately. She says her partner Holden followed Madison back to the building while Thea followed the other 2 to a hotel downtown. This wasn't random. This was planned and coordinated. Madison had help and they targeted our building specifically. I look back at the living room where Madison sits with the officers. She looks small and scared, but I know now it's all performance. Everything about her was performance. A new detective arrives and the officers brief him quickly. He's older than the responding officers with gray hair and sharp eyes. He walks into our living room and introduces himself but doesn't shake hands. He looks at the scene and asks the officers questions in a low voice. Then he turns to me and asks what I do for work. I tell him I'm an attorney at a corporate firm downtown. He asks what kind of cases I handle. I say mostly high-asset divorces and business disputes. He asks if any of my current clients are particularly wealthy or have sensitive information. My stomach drops. I think about my current caseload and 3 names jump out immediately. All 3 are tech executives going through complicated divorces. All 3 have given me extensive financial discovery documents, bank records, business valuations, investment portfolios, asset lists, everything someone would need for identity theft or corporate espionage. I keep copies of everything in my home office because I work late here several nights a week. The detective sees my face change and asks what I'm thinking. I tell him about the 3 clients and their documents. He asks where I keep the files. I point toward my home office down the hall. He calls over the forensic technician and they head that direction together. I follow them to my office and watch the technician photograph everything. My desk is neat like I left it, but my laptop is open. I always close it when I'm done working. The technician checks the browser history and finds searches I didn't make. My clients' names, their companies, their spouses, divorce settlement amounts. Someone sat at my desk and researched everything. The detective asks if anyone else has access to this room. I shake my head and then stop. Kyle was home alone several times when Madison visited. She could have come in here while he was in another room. Or maybe he let her in. Maybe he showed her everything thinking he was helping her understand business or giving her advice. I feel sick. The detective asks if I password protect my files. I say yes, but my laptop auto-logs in when it opens. Basic security that suddenly seems incredibly stupid. The technician finds more evidence. My desk drawer was opened. Files were moved. Someone went through everything carefully and put it back almost perfectly. Almost. The detective asks Kyle to come to the office. Kyle walks in looking miserable. The detective asks if Madison was ever alone in this room. Kyle says yes. He says she was in the apartment alone a few times when he ran errands. He gave her our door code 3 weeks ago in case of emergencies. The detective writes this down, and his expression shows what he thinks about that decision. Madison is still in the living room with the officers when the detective returns. He sits across from her and starts asking questions. His voice is calm but firm. He asks about Alexia and Bertram. Madison's face crumbles and she starts crying again. The detective waits. Madison says Alexia is her wife and Bertram is Alexia's brother. She admits Alexia sent Bertram to get the documents tonight. She insists she didn't know the plan until this evening. She says Alexia became obsessed with making a big score, and Madison was just trying to keep her happy. The detective asks why Madison moved into this building. Madison says it was Alexia's idea. The detective asks about Victor. Madison admits Victor never existed. The Instagram account was fake. The abusive husband story was fake. Everything was designed to gain sympathy and access. The detective asks about the bruise on her face. Madison touches her cheek and says she did it herself with makeup. The cut on her lip is real, but she bit it on purpose. The detective asks how many other residents she targeted. Madison says she doesn't know. Alexia handled the planning. Madison just did what she was told. The detective doesn't look like he believes her. Kyle is standing in the doorway listening to everything. His face looks destroyed. He believed every word Madison said. He thought he was helping someone escape abuse. He gave her our security code and access to our home. He let her into our lives completely. The detective asks Kyle if he ever suspected Madison was lying. Kyle says no. He says she seemed genuinely scared and desperate. The detective asks if Kyle and Madison were physically intimate. Kyle says no loudly. He says they were just friends. He was helping her. The detective asks if they spent time alone together frequently. Kyle admits they did. Morning hikes, afternoon renovation work, evening dinners when I worked late, hours and hours over 6 months. The detective writes everything down. Kyle looks at me desperately, but I look away. I can't deal with his guilt right now. My professional reputation is about to explode because my husband gave a con artist access to confidential client files. Everything I built is at risk because I trusted Kyle and he trusted Madison. The detective stands and makes a phone call. He speaks quietly, but I hear him say something about arresting Bertram and detaining Madison. Officers move to take Bertram into custody. He doesn't resist. They read him his rights and cuff him. The detective tells Madison she's being detained for questioning as a potential accomplice. She starts crying harder and says she didn't know. The detective says they'll sort it out at the station. Officers help her stand and walk her toward the door. She looks back at Kyle and her expression shifts for just a second. It's not scared or sad. It's calculating. Like she's measuring whether he'll still defend her. Then the mask drops back and she's crying again. They take her out and the apartment suddenly feels very empty. Just me and Kyle and my mother and Thea standing in our violated home. The forensic technician is still processing my office. Other officers are finishing their reports. But the main action is over. I pull out my phone and check the time. It's 2 a.m. I need to call my firm's senior partner and tell him what happened. I need to report a potential client confidentiality breach. My hands shake as I find his number. He answers after 4 rings sounding groggy. I apologize for waking him and then explain everything as clearly as I can. An intruder in my home. Documents photographed, my laptop accessed, client information compromised, my personal life creating professional liability. He's quiet for a long moment. Then he asks which clients. I tell him the 3 names. He's quiet again. I can hear the disappointment in his silence. He asks if the police recovered the photos. I say yes. He asks if any information was transmitted or sold. I say I don't know yet. He tells me to come to the office first thing in the morning. We'll need to notify the clients and assess the damage. He says we'll figure it out, but his tone says my partnership track just derailed. He hangs up and I stand in my kitchen holding my phone. My mother is watching me with sad eyes. Thea is talking quietly to the detective. Kyle is sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. The detective finishes with the officers and comes over to me. He says Bertram is being charged with burglary and attempted theft of confidential documents. Madison is being held for questioning and they'll determine charges based on what they learn. He says I should expect follow-up questions over the next few days. He hands me his card and leaves with the remaining officers. The forensic technician finishes in my office and packs up his equipment. He tells me not to use my laptop until their tech team examines it. He leaves too. Then it's just the 4 of us. Me and Kyle and my mother and Thea. The silence is crushing. Nobody knows what to say. My mother goes to the kitchen and starts making tea like that will fix anything. The kettle whistles and she pours 4 cups. We sit around our dining table where Kyle and Madison sat with wine just hours ago. The candles are still there, burned down to nothing. Thea breaks the silence and explains what she and Holden discovered. They've been tracking Madison for 3 days since my mother hired them. They suspected something larger than a simple affair when they saw Madison's movement patterns. She met with the same 2 people multiple times. She spent hours studying our building's layout. She asked questions to other residents about security and schedules. Thea says Madison has been in this building for exactly 6 months. Thea checked with building management and found reports of small thefts and security breaches over that same period. A resident's credit card information stolen. Another resident's identity used to open accounts. Building access codes mysteriously changing. Madison wasn't just targeting us. She was working the entire building as part of a larger operation. Thea shows me her investigation file with photos and timelines and notes. It's extensive and professional. My mother hired good people. Thea says they couldn't prove anything until tonight when Bertram made his move. Now the police have everything they need. I walk into my home office with Thea following close behind me. The laptop sits on my desk exactly where I left it this morning. Innocent looking. Thea pulls on gloves before touching anything and opens the browser history. My stomach drops as I see the searches. My client names, their business holdings, divorce settlement amounts, property valuations, bank account details. Someone went through everything systematically while I was at work. Thea scrolls through the timestamps and they match perfectly with days Kyle admitted Madison was here alone. She takes screenshots of everything while I stand there feeling sick. Kyle appears in the doorway and I turn to face him. He looks at the screen and goes pale. I ask him directly how many times Madison was in this apartment without him present. He stammers that maybe 3 or 4 times when he ran to the store or picked up takeout. Never more than 30 minutes, he swears. Thea shows him the browser history timestamps and some sessions lasted over an hour. Kyle's face crumbles as he realizes Madison lied to him about staying in the living room. She told him she was watching TV or checking her phone. Instead, she was in here stealing my client's confidential information. I feel rage building but keep my voice steady as I ask what else he let her do unsupervised. He insists nothing else, just those few times he thought she was trustworthy. I laugh and it sounds bitter even to my own ears. Thea bags my laptop as evidence and says the forensic team will do a full analysis. She asks if I kept any client files in physical form here. I show her the filing cabinet and she photographs everything before we go through each folder. Nothing appears physically missing, but that means nothing if Madison photographed documents with her phone. We spend 2 hours cataloging every file, every piece of paper, every note. My mother brings coffee at some point, but I barely taste it. The sun comes up and I haven't slept. I shower and put on my best suit like armor. The drive downtown feels surreal. My firm occupies floors 12 through 15 of a glass tower. I've worked here for 7 years, built my reputation case by case. Now I'm walking into the senior partners conference room to explain how I compromised everything. 3 partners sit at the table with our cybersecurity director. Their faces are professional, but I can read the disappointment. I lay out what happened as clinically as possible. The neighbor who gained access to my home, the break-in, the laptop history showing unauthorized searches. They ask questions and I answer each one honestly. How long did this person have access? Did I ever discuss clients by name at home? Were any physical documents photographed? The cybersecurity director takes notes and says they'll need my laptop for a full forensic audit. He asks about my backup systems and cloud storage. I tell him everything is password protected, but Madison had access to my apartment for months. She could have watched me type passwords, could have installed keyloggers, could have done anything. The senior partner who recruited me 7 years ago looks tired. He says they'll need to notify all affected clients about the potential breach. My partnership track that was supposed to happen next year suddenly feels very far away. They're professional about it. No yelling, no accusations. Just quiet disappointment that somehow feels worse. They tell me to take the rest of the day to get my personal affairs in order. We'll reconvene tomorrow to discuss next steps. I leave the conference room and several colleagues turn away rather than make eye contact. My reputation is crumbling in real time. Kyle is sitting in our living room when I get home. He stands up when I walk in and starts talking. He says he's so sorry. He never meant for any of this to happen. Madison seemed so genuine. I hold up my hand and cut him off. My voice is calm but cold when I tell him to pack a bag and stay at a hotel while I figure out what comes next. He protests that nothing physical happened with Madison. I laugh and the sound is harsh. I tell him I don't care if he touched her or not. He let her into our home, into our lives, into my office. He gave her access to everything and kept secrets for weeks. The physical affair doesn't matter because the betrayal of trust is already complete. He starts crying and saying he'll do anything to fix this. I tell him the only thing he can do right now is leave. He asks for how long and I say I don't know. Maybe a week. Maybe forever. He needs to let me think without him here reminding me of how stupid I was. He goes to pack and I sit on the couch staring at nothing. My mother calls but I don't answer. 20 minutes later, Kyle comes out with a suitcase. He tries one more time to apologize and I just point at the door. After he leaves, I change all the locks using my phone app. Change the security code, change the elevator access, erase him from the building systems entirely. It takes 10 minutes to undo 18 months of shared life. My phone rings and it's Mia from the firm. She asks if I need company and I say yes before I can think better of it. She arrives 30 minutes later with her laptop and a box of file folders. Mia has been my friend for 5 years since she started as a junior associate. She doesn't ask questions about Kyle or Madison, just sets up at my dining room table and starts helping me organize evidence for the firm's internal investigation. We create a timeline of every interaction I can remember. Every time Madison was in the apartment. Every conversation. Every moment that seemed innocent but now looks suspicious. Mia takes notes in her precise handwriting while I talk. She asks clarifying questions that help me remember details I'd forgotten. The time Madison asked about my morning routine. The day she wanted to know which clients kept me working late. The casual questions about building security. Everything that seemed like friendly interest was actually intelligence gathering. We work for hours building a comprehensive document. Mia photographs everything Thea collected earlier. We cross-reference timestamps from the building's guest log with my work calendar to show when Madison had unsupervised access. By evening, we have a file that would make any prosecutor proud. Mia closes her laptop and finally asks if I'm okay. I tell her honestly that I don't know. She hugs me and says the firm will get through this and so will I. The detective calls while Mia is packing up her things. He says they've identified Madison and I should sit down for this. Her real name is Madison Volkov, and she's wanted in 2 other states for similar operations. She targeted a doctor in Boston last year, got access to his home under similar pretenses, stole patient records and sold them for identity theft. Before that, she worked over a venture capitalist in Seattle. Same pattern of befriending the target, gaining access, stealing confidential business information. The detective says Alexia Cobb is Madison's wife and partner in these schemes. They've been running cons together for at least 3 years that law enforcement knows about. Probably longer. He says I don't feel lucky. I feel like an idiot who fell for the oldest trick in the book. The detective says he'll be in touch as the investigation continues. He tells me to be careful because Alexia is still at large, and these people can be dangerous when cornered. I thank him and hang up. Mia is staring at me with wide eyes. I tell her what the detective said and she looks sick. She says she's staying the night and I don't argue. The next morning I'm drinking coffee when my phone buzzes with an email from the detective. Attached is a full report on Madison's criminal history. Her real background. I open it and start reading. Victor never existed. The Instagram account was completely fake. Stock photos stolen from a Russian businessman's social media. The conference photos were pulled from public corporate websites. The entire abused wife story was manufactured to gain sympathy and access. Every tear was calculated. Every bruise was makeup. Every scared glance was practiced. I scroll through the evidence and feel stupid for believing any of it. The report shows Madison's modeling credentials were also fake. She never worked for elite models. Never had any legitimate modeling career. That whole identity was constructed specifically for this building and this operation. I think about how she played me. How she found my weakness, my philosophy about trust, and exploited it perfectly. How she used Kyle's kindness and loneliness against him. How every single interaction was a manipulation. Mia comes out of the guest room and finds me crying at the kitchen table. She reads over my shoulder and swears quietly. She makes more coffee and we sit together in silence. Thea calls around noon and asks if she can come over with Holden. I say yes and they arrive with a thick file folder. Thea spreads photos across my dining room table. Madison meeting with Alexia at a coffee shop 3 blocks from here. The 2 of them with Bertram outside our building studying the entrance. More photos of them in a car reviewing what looked like building security footage on a laptop. Holden explains they've been tracking Madison since my mother hired them. They suspected something larger than a simple affair when they noticed her movement patterns. She met with the same 2 people repeatedly. Spent hours studying our building's layout. Asked other residents questions about security protocols and delivery schedules. Thea points to a photo of Madison and Alexia reviewing documents. She says they somehow accessed building security footage, probably through Bertram, who worked as maintenance in another property owned by the same company. They studied resident schedules, identified targets, planned entry strategies. Our apartment wasn't random. We were selected specifically because of my career and client list. Holden shows me more photos of Bertram entering our building wearing maintenance uniforms on 3 separate occasions over the past month. He had been inside before the night we caught him. Thea says they have evidence of Madison casing at least 5 other apartments in the building. We were just one of multiple active operations. I meet with building management the next afternoon. The property manager looks uncomfortable as she pulls up Madison's lease file. She confirms the lease was paid for 6 months upfront in cash by a shell company registered in Delaware. The background check came back clean, but now they're discovering it was completely falsified. Fake employment verification, fake references, fake credit history, everything designed to pass a standard screening. The property manager says they're implementing new protocols after this. More thorough background checks, verification calls to previous landlords, credit checks through multiple agencies. She apologizes repeatedly, but it doesn't change what happened. I ask about the other residents Madison targeted. The property manager says they're still investigating, but at least 2 other apartments reported suspicious activity. One resident had credit card information stolen. Another had their identity used to open fraudulent accounts. Madison and her crew were working the entire building as a criminal enterprise. I ask why nobody noticed sooner. The property manager admits they had reports of security breaches, but attributed them to normal urban crime. Nobody connected the pattern until now. I leave the meeting feeling angry at everyone, including myself. The firm's legal team schedules depositions for the following week. I sit in a conference room with 3 attorneys while they assess liability and potential malpractice claims. They ask the same questions over and over. When did I first meet Madison? How often was she in my home? Did I ever discuss clients by name? Were any documents left accessible? Did I have proper security protocols? I answer everything honestly, even though each question feels like an accusation. 3 clients have already contacted the firm demanding answers. One is threatening to sue both me personally and the firm for negligence. Another wants to know exactly what information was compromised and how it will be secured. The third is simply furious that I brought work home and failed to protect confidential files properly. The legal team explains they're trying to get ahead of potential lawsuits and bar complaints. They need comprehensive documentation of everything that happened. I spend 6 hours going through every detail while they take notes and record everything. By the end, I feel hollowed out. My career that I built so carefully is hanging by a thread because I trusted the wrong person and married someone with terrible judgment. Kyle keeps calling, but I send every call to voicemail. He leaves long messages apologizing and begging to talk. I delete them without listening all the way through. We communicate only by text about practical matters. He asks about his belongings, and I tell him to coordinate with building management for a time when I'm not home. He asks about bills, and I forward him his half. He asks if we can try counseling, and I don't respond. My mother calls every day wanting me to file for divorce immediately. She says Kyle enabled everything and doesn't deserve another chance. I tell her I can't make that decision yet while I'm drowning in depositions and client meetings and damage control. She argues that waiting just prolongs the pain, but I need time to process everything else before I can handle ending my marriage. Kyle texts asking if there's any hope for us. I stare at the message for a long time before typing back that I don't know. He responds immediately asking what he can do. I tell him the truth, which is that nothing he does now changes what he already did. The trust is gone and I don't know if it can be rebuilt. He texts back saying he'll wait as long as it takes. I don't respond because I don't know what to say to that. The detective calls 3 days after everything falls apart to tell me they executed the warrant on Madison's apartment. I meet him at the police station where he spreads evidence photos across a conference table. Surveillance cameras hidden in picture frames. A laptop with software for monitoring wireless networks. Fake passports showing Madison's face with 5 different names. Driver's licenses from 3 states. A filing system with tabs for 6 different building residents, including detailed notes about our schedules, our jobs, our visitors. My file is thickest. Notes about my late work hours. Client names she must have overheard through walls or windows. Photographs of me leaving for the office with timestamps. Kyle's daily routine mapped out in careful handwriting. The detective points to another folder labeled with a couple's name from the 4th floor. Same level of detail. Same calculated surveillance. We weren't special or chosen. We were just one target in a larger operation running simultaneously throughout the building. The detective shows me printed emails between Madison and someone named Alexia, discussing which residents had the most valuable access. My name appears frequently because of my client list. High net worth divorces mean financial records and asset information. Madison specifically requested assignment to me after researching my firm online and identifying me as worth the effort. Every conversation about hiking was planned. Every cooking session was strategy. She learned Kyle loved those specific Ukrainian dishes by going through our trash and finding takeout containers, then researched the recipes. The detective walks me through a timeline they built from Madison's notes. She identified my work schedule within the first week. Learned Kyle worked from home within 2 weeks. Started the coffee and paint color conversations once she confirmed I left early and returned late. Engineered the hiking discovery by following Kyle one morning and pretending it was coincidence. The whole friendship was constructed step by careful step based on surveillance and research. Nothing was real. Nothing was accident. I sit in that conference room staring at evidence of my own stupidity and feel something crack inside my chest that has nothing to do with Kyle or marriage or philosophy. Mia comes to my apartment that weekend with her laptop and a legal pad. We need to prepare for client meetings where I have to disclose the security breach and explain how confidential information was potentially compromised. She helps me draft disclosure letters that are honest without being alarmist. We practice what I'll say when clients ask how this happened, how I'll explain that I brought work home and failed to secure it properly, how I'll take responsibility without making excuses. The first meeting is Monday morning with a tech executive going through a complicated divorce involving stock options and intellectual property. I sit across from him in a conference room and watch his face change as I explain. He's angry but controlled. Asks detailed questions about what specific documents were in my home office, whether his financial statements were photographed, what security measures the firm is implementing. I answer everything honestly and offer to step away from his case if he wants different representation. He thinks for a long moment, then says he appreciates my honesty, but this is unacceptable, and he'll be discussing it with the senior partners. The second meeting goes similarly. A woman whose husband is hiding assets offshore. She's understanding but furious that her private financial information was accessible to criminals. Says she trusted me to protect her interests, and I failed that basic responsibility. I don't argue because she's right. The third client threatens to sue both me and the firm for negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. Says his case involves sensitive business information that could damage his company if it gets out. His attorney is already drafting a complaint. I sit through his anger without defending myself because there's no defense that matters. The detective calls again Tuesday afternoon. Alexia and 2 other accomplices disappeared. Madison's phone records show she made 3 calls in the 20 minutes between when I confronted her about Victor and when the police arrived. Alexia got enough warning to run. They're tracking financial records and communications, but the operation was sophisticated. Multiple shell companies, Bitcoin transactions, encrypted messaging apps. Alexia might have already left the country with fake documents like the ones they found in Madison's apartment. The detective says they're working with federal agencies now because the scope crosses state lines and involves identity fraud. But he's honest that people this organized usually have escape plans. Madison stayed behind either because she was genuinely surprised or because she was the expendable one. Either way, the main architect of the whole thing is gone. I move through the next 2 weeks barely sleeping. Depositions with the firm's legal team. Client meetings where I explain and apologize. Damage control sessions with senior partners. Security consultations about what went wrong and how to prevent it happening again. I come home each night to the penthouse that doesn't feel safe anymore. The living room where Madison sat crying with her fake bruise. The kitchen where she cooked all those calculated meals. The guest bathroom where she and Kyle laughed over paint colors while planning God knows what. Every room holds evidence of how thoroughly I was deceived while I convinced myself I was enlightened and non-controlling. My philosophy about trust and autonomy feels naive now. I let Madison into my home repeatedly. I watched Kyle spend hours with her and told myself I was being mature and secure. I brought confidential client files home and left them accessible because I never imagined my neighbor was a professional con artist. The deception isn't just that Madison lied. It's that I created the perfect conditions for the lies to work. Kyle shows up at my office Thursday morning without warning. Building security calls to ask if I'll see him, and I almost say no. But I need to face this eventually, so I tell them to send him up. He looks terrible when he walks into my office. Hasn't shaved in days. Lost weight I can see in his face and the way his shirt hangs. Dark circles under his eyes. He sits across from my desk and I feel nothing except tired anger. Not at him specifically. At both of us for being so easy to manipulate. I agree to meet him for coffee at a neutral location that afternoon. We sit in a corner booth at a place neither of us has been before. He starts apologizing immediately and I cut him off because I don't want apologies. I want to understand how he let this happen. How we both let this happen. He cries while explaining that Madison told him elaborate stories about escaping abuse and finding herself. About how Victor controlled everything and she felt trapped. About how talking to Kyle made her feel like maybe she could have a real life someday. He genuinely believed he was helping someone in crisis. Thought he was being supportive and kind. Never intended for it to become what it became. I point out that he chose to believe her lies and keep secrets from me. That he spent hours alone with her every day, and never once thought maybe he should tell his wife about the depth of their friendship. That he gave her our security code without asking me. That every choice he made enabled everything that followed. He argues he was just trying to be a good person. I tell him good people don't keep secrets from their spouses. Good people don't let someone else become more important than their marriage. He insists nothing physical happened, and I laugh because that's not the point. The point is, he chose her over me every single day for months. Chose to believe her stories over maintaining boundaries with me. Chose to help her instead of protecting what we built together. I tell him my philosophy about cheating was naive and incomplete. I never accounted for emotional betrayal. For someone letting another person become more important than their spouse without ever touching them. For the way secrets corrode trust even when nothing physical happens. I thought I was being mature by not being jealous or controlling. But really I was just giving him permission to prioritize someone else while I worked late, and convinced myself I was enlightened. He argues he was just being kind and Madison needed help. I tell him kindness doesn't require secrecy and daily intimacy. Kindness doesn't mean spending hours alone with someone while hiding the depth of your friendship from your spouse. Kindness doesn't mean giving someone your home security code without discussing it with the person you live with. He has no response to that. We sit in silence while our coffee gets cold. The senior partners call me on Friday for a meeting about my future with the company. I sit across from 3 people I've worked with for 8 years while they explain the consequences. They've decided not to terminate me. But I'm being moved off high-profile cases for 6 months. Required to complete additional security training and ethics review. Mandatory sessions with the firm's practice management consultant. My partnership track is delayed by at least 2 years. They need to rebuild client trust, and this is the price of my mistakes. One partner says they value my work and believe I can recover from this. Another says the firm's reputation took damage and everyone has to contribute to repairing it. The third just looks disappointed. That's somehow worse than anger. I accept everything without argument because the consequences are devastating but fair. I built my career on being sharp and careful, on protecting client interests and maintaining confidentiality. I let personal blind spots compromise all of that. Let my marriage problems and philosophical beliefs about trust cloud my judgment about security. Brought confidential files home and left them accessible to someone I should never have trusted. The professional damage can't be fully repaired. Even if I work twice as hard for the next 6 years, some clients will always remember that I was the attorney whose neighbor stole their information. Some colleagues will always question my judgment. The partnership I worked toward for almost a decade is delayed because I failed at the most basic responsibility of protecting client trust. I walk out of that meeting and go straight to the bathroom where I finally let myself cry. Mia drives me to the courthouse 3 weeks later for Madison's first court appearance. I haven't slept more than 4 hours a night since everything happened, and my hands shake as I walk through the metal detectors. The courtroom is smaller than I expected, with fluorescent lights that make everyone look sick. Madison sits at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looks smaller somehow, less like the confident woman who cooked borscht in my kitchen, and more like someone caught in a trap. The judge enters and we all stand. I watch Madison's face as the charges get read out loud. Conspiracy to commit theft, identity fraud, unauthorized access to confidential information. Her public defender, a tired-looking woman with gray roots showing, argues that Madison was coerced by her wife. She presents emails that supposedly show Alexia threatening Madison, controlling her movements, forcing her participation. But the prosecutor has phone records showing Madison made dozens of calls to potential targets before moving into our building. Text messages where she bragged about how easy it was to gain Kyle's trust. Photos of her meeting with Alexia and planning the operation weeks before she ever knocked on our door with coffee. Madison's face stays blank through all of it. No tears, no remorse, just that same calculating look I saw the night everything fell apart. The judge sets a preliminary hearing date for 2 weeks out and denies bail. Madison glances back at the gallery as they lead her away, and our eyes meet for just a second. I expect to see something. Fear, regret, maybe even anger. But there's nothing there except cold assessment, like she's already working out her next move. The preliminary hearing happens on a gray Tuesday morning that matches my mood perfectly. I take the stand and swear to tell the truth while Madison watches from the defense table. The prosecutor asks me to describe the timeline of her access to our home. I walk through every detail. The coffee visits that turned into paint consultations, the hiking trips with Kyle, the dinners she cooked while I worked late, how she wore his shirts and learned his favorite foods and slowly became part of our daily life. The prosecutor shows me the photos from my home office, my laptop screen displaying client names, my filing cabinet with folders spread open, my notes about divorce settlements and financial assets. I identify each one and explain what confidential information was visible. Madison's lawyer objects repeatedly, but the judge lets most of it in. When I describe coming home to find them having dinner by candlelight, Madison leans over and whispers something to her attorney. They both look at Kyle, who's sitting in the back row looking miserable. The prosecutor asks if I noticed anything unusual about Madison's behavior. I tell them about the fake bruise, the story about Victor, the phone call from someone labeled wife. The courtroom gets quiet when I explain how her accent disappeared under stress, how her tears stopped the moment she realized I'd caught her in a lie. Madison's lawyer tries to argue I'm biased because of jealousy over my husband's friendship with her client, but I look directly at Madison when I answer. I tell the court I wasn't jealous. I was testing my philosophy about trust and discovered my husband failed and my neighbor was a criminal. Madison stares back at me with those empty eyes, and I realize she's not thinking about the charges or the evidence. She's thinking about what story might reduce her sentence, what angle might work on a jury, what manipulation might still be possible. The judge finds probable cause to proceed to trial, and Madison gets led away without looking back. Kyle's email arrives that night while I'm reviewing case files at my temporary apartment. The subject line says, "I'm sorry," and I almost delete it without reading. But something makes me open it anyway. He writes 12 paragraphs taking full responsibility for everything that happened. He says he was lonely because I worked so much. He says Madison seemed genuinely hurt and he wanted to help. He says he knows now that he was manipulated, but at the time it felt like friendship. He offers to cover all my legal fees from the firm's investigation. He says he'll pay any settlement costs if clients sue. He provides his lawyer's contact information and says he's already moved money into an account I can access. He ends by saying he understands if I never forgive him, but he needs me to know he's truly sorry. I read it 3 times looking for excuses or justifications, but there aren't any. Just acknowledgement that his choices enabled everything that followed. It's too little and way too late. The damage to my career and reputation can't be fixed with money. The violation of trust can't be repaired with apologies. But at least he's finally being honest about the scope of what his secrets cost us both. I don't respond to the email. I save it in a folder with all the other evidence from this disaster and close my laptop. Thea calls the next morning and asks if we can meet for coffee. I find her at a quiet cafe near my office, already sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of her. She slides one toward me and pulls out a tablet. Her investigation went deeper than just following Kyle and Madison. She shows me records from 4 other cities over the past 3 years: Boston, Seattle, Denver, Atlanta. In each location, Madison and Alexia rented apartments in upscale buildings near successful professionals. They studied their targets for weeks before making contact. A doctor in Boston who had access to wealthy patients. A venture capitalist in Seattle with connections to tech executives. A lawyer in Denver who handled estate planning for millionaires. An accountant in Atlanta who managed trust funds. The pattern was always the same. Madison would move in and befriend someone lonely or trusting. She'd create an elaborate cover story about being trapped or controlled. She'd gain access to homes and offices and information. Then Alexia and their team would use that access to steal data they could sell or exploit. Thea shows me police reports from 2 of the cities where victims reported thefts, but couldn't prove anything. Interviews with people who described Madison exactly. Beautiful, vulnerable, excellent at reading emotional needs. The operation was sophisticated and planned. They were skilled at identifying people whose work gave them access to valuable information. They knew how to exploit emotional vulnerabilities and create situations where targets wanted to help. Thea says the FBI is now involved because the crimes crossed state lines. She thinks Madison and Alexia might be part of a larger network. I stare at the timeline on her tablet and realize I was just the latest mark in a long series. Nothing about our friendship was real. Every moment was calculated. My mother comes over that Saturday with groceries and cleaning supplies. She doesn't ask if I need help, just starts organizing my temporary apartment like it's her mission. I sit on the couch and watch her put away food, straighten furniture, create order from chaos. When she finishes, she sits next to me and takes my hand. We don't talk for a long time. I just start going through every moment of the past 6 months out loud. How Madison brought coffee that first morning and complimented our renovation plans. How she asked Kyle about hiking and discovered his passion for trails. How she learned to cook his favorite foods and wore his old shirts. How she cried about Victor and made herself seem helpless. Every red flag I ignored because I was so committed to my philosophy about trust and autonomy. Every moment I chose to believe people were basically good instead of protecting myself. My mother doesn't interrupt or offer advice. She just holds my hand while I cry. When I finally stop talking, she gets up and makes tea. We sit together drinking it in silence as the afternoon light fades. She still doesn't say she was right about hiring the investigator or that I should have listened. She doesn't have to. Her presence says everything that needs saying. Sometimes love means interfering even when you're resented for it. Sometimes protection matters more than respecting someone's philosophy. The detective calls Monday morning with unexpected good news. His team recovered most of the stolen client data from Bertram's cloud storage before it could be sold or used. The files were encrypted, but their tech people cracked it. He's sending everything to my firm's security team so they can assess exactly what was compromised. This helps reduce some of the damage with my clients. The information was accessed and copied, but not exploited or distributed. The violation of trust still happened. Someone unauthorized saw their private financial details and legal strategies. But at least there's no evidence the data reached competitors or got used for identity theft. I call each affected client personally to explain. 2 of them appreciate the update and seem relieved the exposure was limited. 1 still threatens to sue because the breach happened at all. I don't blame him. I failed to protect information he trusted me with. The fact that it was recovered doesn't erase my responsibility for letting it be vulnerable in the first place. My senior partner says this helps but doesn't eliminate all consequences. The firm still took reputation damage. Other clients still have concerns about security. I'm still on probation and my partnership is still delayed. But at least the worst-case scenario got avoided. At least I can tell people the actual harm was contained, even if the potential harm was enormous. Mia recommends a therapist who specializes in helping professionals deal with work-related trauma. I make an appointment even though part of me resists the idea that I need therapy. The therapist's office is small and comfortable with soft lighting and plants everywhere. She asks me to describe what happened, and I give her the whole story. When I finish, she asks what I think my biggest mistake was. I say trusting Madison and letting her into our home. The therapist shakes her head gently. She says my mistake wasn't trust itself, but refusing to verify or set boundaries because I was so attached to a philosophical principle. Having beliefs about autonomy and trust is good, but applying them rigidly without adjusting for real-world complexity is dangerous. She asks if I would let a stranger watch my laptop while I went to the bathroom in a coffee shop. I say no. She asks why not. I say because I don't know them and they could steal it. She nods. So I do believe in appropriate caution based on how well I know someone and what's at risk. I just didn't apply that same logic to Madison because I was testing Kyle and got distracted by the bigger drama. The therapist helps me understand that mature trust means verification alongside faith. It means protecting valuable things while still being open to connection. It means my philosophy needs updating based on experience instead of staying rigid, because I decided it once. We schedule weekly sessions to work through the rest of it. Madison takes a plea deal 6 weeks after her arrest. 5 years in prison in exchange for cooperating with efforts to find Alexia and recover assets from previous cons. The prosecutor calls to tell me before it becomes public. He says Madison provided detailed information about their operation, how they chose targets, what information they sought, where they sold the data they stole. She gave up locations where Alexia might be hiding and names of other people in their network. The cooperation will help build cases against bigger players, but Alexia herself is still missing. She disappeared the night of the break-in and hasn't used any known credit cards or contacted any known associates. The FBI thinks she left the country using a fake passport. She might be in Europe or South America by now. I feel satisfaction that Madison will face real consequences for what she did. 5 years is significant time. She'll be almost 30 when she gets out. But I'm angry that Alexia remains free. She was the mastermind who planned everything. She sent Bertram into our home. She orchestrated the whole operation while Madison played the victim. The justice feels incomplete when the person most responsible is drinking wine somewhere unreachable while her wife sits in a cell. Kyle texts asking if we can meet to talk about our marriage. I agree to have coffee at a neutral place downtown. He looks terrible when he arrives. Unshaven, thinner, dark circles under his eyes. He orders a drink and sits across from me like we're strangers negotiating something difficult. He asks if I'll consider marriage counseling. He says he's been in therapy working on himself. He says he understands now how badly he messed up. He wants a chance to rebuild trust and save our marriage. I tell him honestly that I don't know if I want to save it. The foundation of trust is completely destroyed. He kept massive secrets. He prioritized Madison's emotional needs over our marriage. He gave her access to our home without discussing it with me. He enabled everything that followed. Kyle says nothing physical happened between them. I tell him that's not the point. The betrayal of trust is complete regardless of whether they had sex. He let another person become more important than his spouse. He made daily choices to be intimate with someone else while hiding the depth of that friendship from me. Marriage counseling can't fix that unless we both actually want to do the work. Right now, I'm not sure either of us has the energy or desire to rebuild from nothing. Kyle starts crying and says he loves me and he's sorry. I believe he's sorry. But sorry doesn't undo the damage. Sorry doesn't restore what broke between us. I tell him I need more time to figure out what I want. We finish our coffee in uncomfortable silence and leave separately. My mother comes over for dinner that Sunday and brings takeout from my favorite restaurant. We eat at my small kitchen table and she finally tells me the whole truth about hiring Thea. She says it wasn't just because she was worried about Kyle's affair. She recognized Madison's behavior patterns from something that happened years ago. One of her close friends got targeted by a similar con in another city. A beautiful woman moved into their building, befriended the friend's husband, gained access to their home. The woman's supposed abusive partner was actually her wife and criminal partner. They stole financial information and tried to use it for identity theft before getting caught. My mother saw the same pattern with Madison. The elaborate victim story, the rapid intimacy, the focus on someone with access to valuable information. She hired Thea immediately because she knew what she was seeing. Her interference, which I resented so much at the time, literally saved me from even worse consequences. If she hadn't hired that investigator, Madison and Alexia might have gotten away with everything. The break-in might never have been discovered. My client's information might have been sold and used. My career damage might have been permanent. I look at my mother across the table and feel something shift. She wasn't being controlling or distrusting. She was protecting me based on experience and pattern recognition I didn't have. Sometimes the people who love us see dangers we're too close to notice. Sometimes their interference is the thing that saves us, even when we fight against it. I reach across the table and take her hand and say thank you for not listening when I told her to stay out of it. I meet with my attorney the following week to start the legal separation paperwork. The process feels mechanical, like I'm handling someone else's case instead of my own life falling apart. My attorney explains the difference between legal separation and divorce, how this gives me time to decide what I really want without the finality of ending the marriage completely. I sign the initial documents and feel nothing except tired. Kyle gets served the papers at his hotel 3 days later and calls me crying, begging for one more chance to fix things. I tell him the separation isn't punishment, it's protection. I need space to think without him in my home, without his presence clouding my judgment about whether this marriage can be saved or should be ended. He asks if there's any hope for us, and I say honestly that I don't know yet. The movers come the next weekend to pack up Kyle's belongings. I stay at my mother's house because I can't watch him box up 8 years of our life together. When I return that evening, half the closets are empty. His office is cleared out, and the penthouse feels hollow. I change every lock that night, reprogram the security system with new codes, and update the building's access list to remove Kyle's entry privileges. The locksmith leaves, and I walk through each room, touching the bare spaces where Kyle's things used to be, trying to figure out if I feel relieved or devastated. The building management calls an emergency residence meeting 2 weeks later to address what happened. The property manager stands in the lobby conference room looking uncomfortable while explaining that Madison's background check was falsified, and they're implementing new security protocols. Every resident will need updated identification verification. Guest access will be limited to 48 hours without management approval, and they're installing additional security cameras in common areas. Several neighbors approach me afterward, thanking me awkwardly for exposing the operation before more people got hurt. Mrs. Quintana from the 12th floor squeezes my hand and says she's grateful I was brave enough to investigate when things felt wrong. But I also catch the whispers from other residents who clearly blame me for bringing danger into the building. A couple from the 15th floor moves out entirely within the month, citing security concerns. I overhear someone in the elevator say my poor judgment endangered everyone, that I should have reported Madison's suspicious behavior instead of playing detective. The building feels different now, less like a luxury community and more like a place where everyone watches everyone else with suspicion. I throw myself into work with desperate focus, taking on 3 pro bono cases that nobody else wants to handle. One involves a single mother fighting for custody against a wealthy ex-husband, another is helping an elderly veteran sort out a housing dispute, and the third is representing a small business owner being sued by a former partner. The cases don't pay anything, but they're complex and demanding, requiring the kind of intense concentration that leaves no room for thinking about my destroyed marriage or professional reputation. I work 12-hour days, stay late at the office reviewing case files, and volunteer for weekend research projects. Mia becomes my closest ally during this period, running interference when senior partners make pointed comments about my judgment. She deflects questions about my personal life, covers for me when I need to meet with my attorney, and brings me coffee when I'm buried in depositions. One afternoon, she sits in my office and tells me that half the firm is rooting for me to come back stronger, that they respect how I'm handling the crisis with dignity instead of falling apart. The other half thinks I should have been fired, but Mia says those partners would find fault with anything, because they never wanted women in leadership positions anyway. 3 months after the break-in, I'm reviewing discovery documents for the custody case when my phone rings with the detective's number. He tells me that Alexia was arrested yesterday trying to cross into Canada using fake documents at a border checkpoint in Montana. Border Patrol flagged her passport as fraudulent and found 3 other fake IDs in her possession when they searched her car. She's being held in federal custody pending extradition back to face charges for the operation. The detective says their investigation has uncovered evidence linking Alexia to similar cons in 7 other cities across the country over the past 4 years. She and Madison worked as a team targeting professionals with access to valuable information or wealthy clients, using the same playbook in each location. They'd move into upscale buildings, identify vulnerable targets, manufacture elaborate victim stories, and gain access to homes and private information. The detective estimates they stole over $2 million worth of data and assets from at least 15 victims before we caught them. I sit at my desk processing this information, realizing how many other people went through versions of what I experienced, how many marriages were damaged and careers were threatened by their calculated manipulation. The prosecutor's office contacts me 6 weeks later, asking me to testify at Alexia's trial about the operation's impact on my life and career. I agree immediately because I want her to face consequences for what she orchestrated. The trial is scheduled for late September, giving me 2 months to prepare my testimony. My attorney helps me organize documentation about the professional damage, the client losses, the delayed partnership track, and the ongoing reputation repair I'm still working through. The prosecutor meets with me 3 times to review what I'll say on the stand, warning me that Alexia's defense team will try to discredit my testimony by suggesting I enabled the operation through poor judgment. I tell the prosecutor I can handle whatever they throw at me, because the truth is bad enough without embellishment. Facing Alexia in court feels more difficult than facing Madison, because Alexia was the mastermind who orchestrated everything while staying safely in the background. Madison was the visible threat, the person in my home creating chaos. But Alexia was the puppet master pulling strings I never saw. The idea of sitting across from her while she shows no remorse for destroying multiple lives makes my stomach tight with anger. The trial starts on a Tuesday morning in late September. I sit in the witness waiting room reviewing my notes while other victims arrive to testify about their experiences with Madison and Alexia's operation. A doctor from Boston tells me they lost their medical practice after Madison stole patient records that got leaked online. A venture capitalist from Seattle says Madison's access to his home office resulted in corporate espionage that cost his firm millions in lost deals. Each story follows the same pattern of manufactured vulnerability, gained trust, and calculated theft. When my turn comes to testify, I walk into the courtroom and see Alexia sitting at the defense table looking completely unbothered. She's wearing a conservative suit, her hair pulled back professionally, and she watches me with cold assessment like I'm a problem to be solved rather than a person she hurt. The prosecutor guides me through my testimony about how Madison gained access to our home, how the operation progressed, and what the consequences were for my career and marriage. Alexia's defense attorney tries to suggest I was negligent in protecting client information, that I enabled the theft through poor security practices. I acknowledge my mistakes without apology while making it clear that Alexia orchestrated a criminal conspiracy that exploited human trust for profit. Alexia shows no remorse during the entire trial. Her defense strategy is to blame Madison entirely, claiming she was just a supportive spouse who didn't know about the criminal activities until after arrests were made. Her attorney presents her as a victim of Madison's manipulation, someone who trusted the wrong person and got caught up in crimes she didn't understand or participate in. The prosecution destroys this narrative with evidence showing Alexia's direct involvement in planning the operations, managing the stolen data, and coordinating the team's movements between cities. They present emails where Alexia discusses target selection and strategy, financial records showing her controlling the proceeds from their cons, and testimony from Bertram, admitting that Alexia directed his actions during the break-in at my home. The jury watches Alexia's face during this evidence presentation, and I can see them recognizing her lies for what they are. When the prosecution plays a recorded phone call between Alexia and Madison discussing how to maximize the take from my client's information, Alexia finally shows emotion by glaring at the prosecutor with pure hatred. The jury deliberates for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The sentencing hearing happens 3 weeks later. Both Alexia and Madison receive substantial prison sentences reflecting the scope of their operation and the number of victims they hurt. Alexia gets 12 years in federal prison plus 5 years supervised release. Madison gets 8 years because the judge accepts that she was somewhat under Alexia's influence, though still fully culpable for her actions. They're both ordered to pay restitution to all identified victims, though the financial recovery will be minimal since they spent most of their proceeds on luxury apartments, expensive clothes, and maintaining their fake identities. The judge tells them their crimes represented calculated exploitation of human decency and trust, that they targeted good people trying to be kind and turned that kindness into a weapon. I watch them get led away in handcuffs and feel something settle in my chest. The justice feels meaningful even if it's incomplete, even if I'll never recover the full cost of what they took from me professionally and personally. Kyle texts me 2 days after sentencing, asking if we can meet for dinner to discuss divorce terms and division of assets. I agree to meet him at a neutral restaurant downtown, somewhere neither of us has history or memories attached. He arrives looking thinner and tired, wearing clothes I don't recognize that he must have bought after moving out. We sit across from each other in a booth and the awkwardness is suffocating. He asks how I'm doing and I give him the abbreviated version about work and the trial. He tells me about his new apartment in a different neighborhood, his job search since he quit his remote position, and his therapy sessions. We order food neither of us really eats while discussing asset division, like we're strangers negotiating a business transaction, rather than people who once promised forever to each other. He wants to split everything fairly, and doesn't fight me on any terms. We agree on the penthouse sale, the division of bank accounts, and the separation of our investments with minimal discussion. The conversation is civil but distant, like we're playing roles in someone else's divorce rather than ending our own marriage. Kyle admits halfway through dinner that he's been in therapy twice a week working on understanding why he was so susceptible to Madison's manipulation. His therapist helped him recognize patterns in how he prioritizes being seen as a good person over actually being a good husband. He says he got so focused on rescuing Madison from her fake situation that he completely abandoned his actual responsibilities to me and our marriage. He talks about how he needed to feel like a hero, how Madison's manufactured vulnerability fed something broken in him that made him feel important and needed in ways our stable marriage didn't provide. It's growth and self-awareness that might have meant something 6 months ago. But sitting here now, listening to him explain the psychology behind his betrayal, I feel nothing except tired recognition that understanding why something broke doesn't repair the damage. He asks if there's any chance we could try again with everything he's learned in therapy. I tell him honestly that I don't think so, that too much trust was destroyed for me to rebuild from nothing, that we'd both be better off starting fresh with other people who don't carry the weight of this betrayal. We agree to an uncontested divorce with a fair division of assets before dessert arrives. Neither of us wants the penthouse with its memories of Madison's manipulation, and our marriage falling apart, so we decide to sell it and split the proceeds equally. Kyle will keep his car and his retirement accounts. I'll keep mine and we'll divide the joint savings down the middle. There's no fight about furniture or belongings because neither of us cares enough to argue over material things after everything else that's been lost. We sign the preliminary agreement our attorneys drafted and shake hands like business partners closing a deal. The paperwork gets finalized 4 months after that night when everything exploded, when we discovered someone in our bedroom and Madison's whole facade crumbled. The divorce decree arrives in the mail on a Tuesday afternoon, and I sign it without crying, file it with the other documents from this period of my life, and feel nothing except relief that it's finally over. The senior partners call me into the conference room 3 weeks after the divorce papers arrive. I walk in expecting another round of professional consequences, another reduction in responsibility, but their faces aren't angry. The managing partner gestures to a chair and slides a folder across the table. Inside is my performance review for the probationary period, filled with notes about my work on the smaller cases they assigned me, my handling of client communications, my cooperation with the internal investigation. They acknowledge that I worked harder than anyone expected during the worst months of my career, that I rebuilt client trust one case at a time, that I never complained about the demotion or made excuses for what happened. The managing partner tells me they're offering me a path back to significant cases starting next month, though partnership is delayed by at least 2 years while I continue proving my judgment and reliability. I accept without hesitation, because I understand that trust, once broken, requires years to rebuild, and I'm lucky they're giving me the chance at all. Mia gets promoted to partner 2 months later, and I attend the ceremony without jealousy or resentment. She worked for it and earned it, and when she gives her acceptance speech, she mentions how much she learned from working with me during the crisis, how I showed her what professional integrity looks like even when everything is falling apart. Several colleagues who avoided me for months start nodding as she speaks, and I realize her generosity is helping repair my reputation in ways I couldn't do alone. After the ceremony, she hugs me and whispers that she recommended me for 2 of her overflow cases, high-value clients who specifically requested someone with experience handling complex personal situations. The work starts flowing back gradually, not the flood of cases I had before, but steady referrals from people who respect how I handled disaster with honesty, instead of deflection. 6 months after the break-in, I sign the lease on a smaller apartment in a neighborhood across town. The building has better security than the penthouse, keycard access for every floor, cameras in all common areas, a doorman who actually checks identification. My mother helps me move in and spends an entire weekend arranging furniture and hanging curtains, chattering about color schemes and natural light without mentioning Kyle's name once. She brings takeout for dinner and we eat sitting on boxes in the living room, and she tells me the apartment feels like a fresh start, like a place where I can build something new without ghosts watching from every corner. I sleep better the first night there than I have in months. No memories of Madison's fake tears or Kyle's betrayal embedded in the walls. I run into Kyle 3 weeks later at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse. He's waiting for his order when I walk in, and we both freeze for a second before he smiles tentatively and asks how I'm doing. We end up sitting at a corner table for 20 minutes having the most genuinely friendly conversation we've had since everything exploded. He tells me he's been dating someone from his therapy group, a woman who survived her own manipulation and understands why he fell for Madison's act. He looks lighter somehow, less burdened by guilt, and I realize I feel nothing except mild curiosity about his happiness. There's no anger left, no lingering attachment, just 2 people who used to be married comparing notes on their separate lives. He asks if I'm seeing anyone, and I tell him not yet, but maybe soon, and he nods like he understands that I needed time to figure out who I am without him, or the marriage we built. Thea and Holden become unexpected friends over the following months. They invite me to dinner occasionally to share updates on other cases they're working, and Thea tells me that exposing Madison and Alexia's operation helped break up a larger network of similar cons targeting professionals in major cities. The FBI connected their scheme to at least 12 other victims across 6 states, all following the same pattern of manufactured vulnerability and strategic access to confidential information. Holden shows me surveillance photos from a case in Chicago, where they caught another team using identical tactics, and knowing my disaster helped protect other people makes the whole nightmare feel slightly less pointless. We toast to small victories, and they tell me I'm stronger than most people they've worked with, that most victims of elaborate cons never recover their professional standing the way I'm rebuilding mine. A colleague from another firm contacts me about a pro bono case 8 months after everything fell apart. Another attorney got targeted by a different con artist who used a fake emergency to gain access to her client files, and she's facing ethics complaints and potential disbarment while trying to prove she was manipulated rather than negligent. I meet with her at a neutral location and recognize the shame in her eyes, the desperate need to make someone understand that she wasn't stupid or careless, just human. I spend 3 hours walking her through everything I learned about documenting the manipulation, gathering evidence of the con artist's pattern, demonstrating to ethics boards that reasonable precautions failed against sophisticated deception. Turning my disaster into something useful for others feels like meaningful progress, like finding purpose in the wreckage. A year after that night when everything unraveled, I'm sitting in my apartment reviewing case files and realize I'm genuinely happy. Not the naive happiness I had before when I thought my philosophy about trust made me enlightened, but authentic satisfaction with the life I've rebuilt from nothing. My apartment is smaller, but it's mine, decorated with furniture I chose without compromise. My partnership is delayed, but my client list is growing again with referrals from people who respect how I handled crisis with integrity. My philosophy about trust has evolved from idealistic nonsense to realistic wisdom about human nature, about the importance of verification alongside faith, about the difference between trusting blindly and trusting wisely. I'm not the same person who moved into that penthouse 18 months ago, and I'm grateful for that because she was setting herself up for exactly what happened. My mother and I have dinner every Sunday now, and our relationship is stronger than it's ever been. She never says I told you so about Kyle or Madison, never gloats about being right when I was wrong, just sits across from me each week sharing updates about her book club and asking about my cases. Sometimes I catch her looking at me with quiet satisfaction, not because I suffered, but because I survived and grew from the experience. She tells me once that she's proud of how I handled everything, how I took responsibility instead of making excuses, how I rebuilt instead of running away. Coming from her, someone who rarely gives compliments, it means more than any professional achievement. I start dating again casually, meeting people through friends and work connections, approaching new relationships with updated boundaries that balance openness with appropriate caution. My philosophy about trust has evolved from the naive idealism I started with to realistic wisdom about human nature. I still believe in giving people chances, but now I verify instead of just trusting. I watch for patterns instead of ignoring red flags. I protect my professional life instead of letting personal relationships compromise it. The men I date now get honesty about what happened and what I learned, and the ones who can't handle my wariness don't get second dates. I'm not interested in proving I'm healed by rushing into something new, just slowly building connections with people who understand that wisdom sometimes comes from disaster. The firm officially restores me to full standing 18 months after the break-in. The managing partner calls me into his office and tells me they're assigning me a major case representing a tech executive in a complex divorce with millions in assets and complicated business holdings. My first instinct is anxiety about the parallels to what happened, about handling confidential information for wealthy clients after my security was compromised. But then I realize I'm uniquely qualified for this case precisely because I understand the stakes and vulnerabilities, because I know how con artists target professionals with access to valuable information, because I can protect this client in ways other attorneys might miss. I accept the case and spend the first week implementing security protocols that go beyond standard practice, protecting client data like I should have protected my own. The case goes to trial 8 months later, and I'm ready in ways I never was before. Every document is organized, every witness prepared, every angle covered 3 times over. My client trusts me completely because I've been honest about what happened and what I learned, and that honesty builds something stronger than the blind faith I used to offer. The opposing counsel tries to paint my past security breach as evidence of incompetence, but I address it directly in my opening statement, explaining how surviving professional crisis taught me to protect clients better than attorneys who never faced consequences for their mistakes. The jury responds to that authenticity, and over 6 days of testimony, I dismantle the opposing side's arguments with precision that comes from rebuilding my skills from the ground up. When the verdict comes back in our favor with a settlement that exceeds our initial demands, my client hugs me in the courthouse hallway and tells 3 of his business partners about my work before we even leave the building. Those referrals turn into 3 major cases over the next 4 months, all high-profile tech executives with complex asset divisions and confidential business holdings, and the firm's senior partners notice. They call me into a meeting and restore my partnership track to the original timeline, acknowledging that I've not only recovered from the crisis, but emerged as someone uniquely qualified for sensitive cases requiring both legal expertise and hard-won wisdom about security and trust. 2 years after that night when Madison's phone showed a caller ID that unraveled everything, I sit in my smaller apartment reviewing case files for tomorrow's client meeting and feel something unexpected settle in my chest. Genuine contentment. Not the forced optimism I performed for months while rebuilding, but real satisfaction with who I've become through disaster and recovery. My marriage to Kyle ended in an uncontested divorce that felt more like a business dissolution than the death of love. And I understand now that what we had was built on my naive philosophy about trust, rather than actual intimacy or partnership. Madison and Alexia are both serving prison sentences for their coordinated cons, and while that justice feels meaningful, it doesn't define my story anymore. My career took damage that required 2 years of relentless work to repair, but the attorney I am now understands vulnerabilities and human nature in ways my younger self never could, and that expertise makes me better at protecting clients who trust me with their most sensitive information. I learned that surviving betrayal with integrity matters more than never being betrayed at all, that wisdom sometimes requires disaster as tuition, and that my philosophy about trust needed updating from idealistic theory to realistic practice that verifies while still believing in human goodness. The case files spread across my coffee table represent clients who chose me specifically because of what I survived and how I handled it, and that validation feels more solid than any achievement I earned when success came easy.